Hello there, welcome back. This is session number 3. We're going to be looking at how problematic is somebody's substance use. And we thought this would be a good topic to present to you because often families find it very difficult to know whether they should be worried about somebody's substance use or not. Now, as before, the information I'm going to be presenting to you is very general, and you'll need to decide for yourself how much of it applies to your particular situation and how you may choose to respond to that. Now, I've got a couple of slides to present to you, and what these slides will show is that there are different stages of substance use. Now, before I come on to those, I just want to make a couple of general comments about substance use. Very often, a theme behind it is people want to change how they feel, think and behave, as we were looking in the previous session. And I think it's important to have that in mind as we look at the stages of substance use. And a further point that I'd like to make is that what may have begun as something which served somebody, they did it because it seemed to help them, actually can reach a point where it's no longer helpful and actually becomes problematic for them and for the people in their lives, such as yourself. Okay, with those general points in mind, I'm going to come on and show you the first slide. Okay, what we have here is the top half of a table. And what it shows us is that there are different stages of use, as I said, that's down that left-hand column. People use because in some way the behaviour serves them, there's a purpose to it, that's that middle column. And then their substance use has an effect upon them. Now I'm going to talk you through each stage, and we'll take a pause partway through before we come on to the second slide. Now, as you can see, the first stage of use is abstinence, and this is where somebody isn't using anything at all. Now, the purpose of this behaviour might be that someone has no motive to use, they fear using, or they want to use but they can't get access to substances. Now, obviously, because they're not using, substances can't have any effect on them and their body. Now, notice that there's a set of arrows. People can move back and forth between the stages, and the next one is what I've called experimental use. Now, this is where people are curious to try different substances to find out what they like and what they don't, how much of it to use, and when to use it. Now, in this experimental stage of substance use, substances are obviously beginning to have an effect upon somebody's mind and on their body. If their use is excessive, that may be either by accident or because actually that's what they wanted to happen. Their capacity to relate to others, such as yourself, to manage their own money, and to go to work or to college, isn't regularly affected, if it's affected at all. Now, this experimental stage of use usually begins in the teenage years, where it can be seen as part of a wider experimentation with the adult world, such as young people also maybe wanting to get a job, learning to drive, having sex. Sometimes it may begin earlier, and very occasionally even in childhood, although typically this would be associated with adverse experiences. Experimenting can continue well into someone's 20s, and for a few people maybe beyond that too. There are three main reasons to experiment. These are the expectation of a positive outcome to how they're going to feel, think or behave, to fit in with friends, or to medicate themselves when experiencing difficult and painful emotions. And let me just say a little bit more about that last one, because this is an idea I'm going to be presenting often to you during these sessions. There's this phrase self-medication, and what it means is people medicate themselves in order to change the way they feel, think and behave by using a substance. And very often this is when people experience difficult and painful emotions. Now, someone's readiness to experiment is influenced by their peers and by their family, and also by the social and cultural norms that they have. If they have a faith, then that will presumably have some bearing on things too. and people may or may not follow those religious, social and cultural norms. Now then, let's come on to this third stage, what I've called substance use. Now this is the regular use of substances for recreation, social or for medical reasons, and maybe also for coping with emotions. So what we can see is that excessive use is rare because someone has worked out through experimentation how much to use and when to use it, and therefore their capacity to relate to others, such as yourself, to manage their money and to go to work or to college, aren't significantly affected. So using substances is just one other aspect of somebody's life. Now notice all the arrows point up and down. So people can move back and forth. They may have regular substance use for a period, then they may move back up and experiment with something new. There may even be periods of abstinence, and then they can come back down to substance use again. Well, those are the first of three stages of substance use. And how concerned should you be if someone's using at one of those stages? Experimental use can be a worry where it concerns young people, and obviously for parents in particular. And whilst there is a risk in any drug and alcohol use, it's important to remember that the vast majority of young people don't come to too much harm through their experimentation. That third stage, substance use, there can be a risk there too. Where someone's using something regularly, such as alcohol, cannabis, or maybe an opiate-based medicine, such as a painkiller, then there's a risk of their tolerance going up over time, and they could eventually, possibly, become addicted. And with that in mind, there are two further stages that I'd like to present to you. So I'll come on to the next slide. The first of these two concerning stages is problematic use. This is where someone is using substances to regulate how they feel. This can be either to regulate emotions down, such as self-medication, as I mentioned earlier, as a way to cope with difficult and painful emotions, or to regulate them up, to have pleasure or for thrill-seeking. It's as if someone's saying to themselves, why should I feel this way if I could feel that way when I take drugs or alcohol? And what we see at problematic use is that excessive use is much more frequent, and that's the intention for using. It would include things like binge drinking and also the misuse of medication. Now, this does affect someone's capacity to relate to others, such as yourself, as well as their capacity to manage money and to go to work or to go to college. However, it's important to recognise that in this problematic stage, someone still has control over their substance use and has at least short periods of abstinence when they're not using. It can be difficult to know what exactly is a problem. Is it a problem just for you? Is it a problem for other people? Is it a problem for them? And perhaps a way to think about this is in terms of their capacity to relate to others, manage money, and to go to work or to college, and when these are adversely affected, even if the person who's using doesn't see it as a problem. Okay, let's come on to the final stage. This is what I've called addictive use, or drug dependency, or a dependency on alcohol. Now, it's important to recognise that what served someone as a way to regulate how they felt has become habitual, and it's also unhealthy. So it no longer serves any useful purpose to them. What we can see is that addiction is characterised by a compulsion to use excessively, and eventually to the exclusion of everything else. So it's the only activity that seems to matter in their lives. Therefore, their capacity to relate to others, to manage their money, to go to work or to college, they are severely affected. And eventually, over time, every other aspect of someone's life is either adjusted around substance use or it no longer happens. But what I would like to point out is that notice the arrows only point downwards for this final stage. It appears that people can move backwards and forwards between problematic use, just everyday substance use, experimental use and abstinence. They can move backwards and forwards. But if they're one of these few people who end up in addiction, it seems as though they go beyond a point of no return. Then it seems very difficult for them to be able to move back up again. And it seems for the vast majority of those people, the only other realistic option is abstinence. There's a tiny handful of people who do seem to be able to move out of addiction and eventually, after a period of abstinence, can maybe use again in a controlled way and not end up back in addiction. But they do seem to be very rare. Someone who gets addicted needs to think in terms of probably never using alcohol or drugs again. Okay, so those are 5 stages of substance use. It's important for you to consider what stage someone's at, and maybe that's difficult to know. If you are struggling to work out what stage they're at, that might be something to talk to them about. And indeed, if there are concerns that you have about the stage of substance use that they're at, then again, that's something that you may want to talk to them about. You may even want to propose to them that they watch this video. Now, in terms of having a conversation with them, this might be difficult, in which case I propose that you watch session number 7, where I'll be sharing with you ideas to talk to someone about their substance use. Okay, there's just one last thing I'd like to share with you. It's important that you consider the support that you might need at what may be a difficult and stressful time in your life. And with that in mind, I'd like to encourage you to look elsewhere on the Adfam website for the sources of support that there may be in your area. Okay, well that's the end of session number 3. The following session number 4 is, as I said earlier, focusing on addiction, what it is, and how does it happen to someone. Okay, bye for now.